lost everything after bankruptcy. My husband left. My daughter distanced herself. At 56, I sat in a blood donation center, hoping to earn $50. The nurse's face went pale when she looked at my test results. She called the doctor in. He told me I possess a blood type that only 43 people in the world have ever been recorded to have. A billionaire in New York desperately needs your blood type. Her family is willing to pay an enormous sum of money. I thought I had hit rock bottom. But it turned out rock bottom was only the beginning of the cruelest test of my life. I'm truly grateful you're here. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Please note, some elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is coincidental, but the message is meant to be meaningful and thought-provoking. I sat in the plastic chair at the Boston Plasma Donation Center, my hands trembling as I filled out the intake form. The pen felt heavy between my fingers, strange considering I'd once signed million-dollar contracts without a second thought. Now here I was, checking boxes about my medical history in exchange for $50. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and desperation. Around me sat others with their own stories. A young man in a Red Sox cap scrolled through his phone. 2 college students whispered over textbooks. An elderly man dozed in the corner. We were all here for the same reason: we needed money, and we had something to sell. The receptionist behind the plexiglass handed me the clipboard. "Fill these out completely, Mrs. Bennett. Check any boxes that apply. When you're done, take a seat." Her smile never reached her eyes. I nodded, shame burning beneath my skin. The blue vinyl squeaked as I settled into an empty corner. Eleanor Bennett, age 56, current address. I hesitated, then wrote my sister Linda's place. 6 months ago, I would have driven past this building without a glance. 6 months ago, I lived in a penthouse overlooking the Charles River running elegance events and coordinating galas for Boston's elite. Now I was here trading what flows through my veins for insulin money. Eleanor Bennett. A young woman in colorful scrubs stood at the doorway. Her name tag read, Andrea Rodriguez, phlebotomist. She had warm brown eyes and a genuine smile. "That's me," I said, gathering my purse. "First time donating?" she asked as I followed her down a hallway. "Is it obvious?" "We remember our regulars." Andrea gestured me into a small screening room. "I'm Andrea. I'll handle your intake today." She motioned for me to sit while reviewing my paperwork, then wrapped a pressure cuff around my arm. "You have amazing veins," she said, pointing to my inner elbow. "Some folks we hunt around. Yours are perfect." Despite everything, I almost smiled. At least something's functioning properly. Andrea glanced at me with curiosity, but didn't pry. She recorded my pressure, weighed me, asked routine questions. Had I traveled recently? Any tattoos? Medications? Just the insulin I desperately needed and couldn't afford. "All right, Mrs. Bennett." Andrea prepared the needle and collection tubes. "I'm taking a preliminary sample now to test your levels." She swabbed my elbow with something cold. "Small pinch," she warned. I looked away. The needle slipped in smoothly. I barely felt it. "Perfect. See, you were made for this." I watched the dark red liquid fill the vial. This was what my life had become. Eleanor Bennett, who once commanded ballrooms and coordinated events for governors, now watching her sample fill a tube for $50. Andrea labeled the vial carefully, then prepared a second tube. "I need to run quick tests. Make sure everything looks good before we proceed." She drew the second sample, placed a cotton ball over the site, and bent my arm up. "All done with this part." Her voice was warm. "Wait here while I run these to the lab. I'll be right back." The door clicked shut. I sat alone in the small room, staring at the cotton ball pressed against my arm. The antiseptic smell clung to everything. Through the thin walls, I could hear machines humming voices, murmuring equipment, beeping. My phone buzzed in my purse. Probably Linda checking if I'd gotten the money, or another bill collector. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I sat there thinking about how far I'd fallen. The penthouse I'd lost. The company I'd built over 22 years gone in weeks. The husband who'd packed his bags and walked away. About how I'd spent this morning calculating whether I could afford both insulin and groceries, knowing I couldn't. About how the mighty Eleanor Bennett had been reduced to selling parts of herself just to survive. The minutes ticked by, 5 then 10. What was taking so long? Had something gone wrong with my sample? Was I sick? Did I have some condition that would disqualify me from even this desperate measure? My stomach knotted with a new kind of fear. While I waited in that small room, my mind drifted back to where it always went these days, to the moment everything fell apart. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning. The health inspector's voice was professionally neutral, but I could hear the weight behind his words. There had been an incident at the Lakeside Bank Anniversary Gala. Multiple guests had fallen ill. Severe food poisoning. My entire body had gone cold. I'd coordinated that event for months. Every detail had been perfect. The ice sculptures, the string quartet, the imported orchids, and the seafood, fresh Atlantic lobster and oysters from our most trusted supplier. Or so I'd thought. Within 48 hours, the story was everywhere. 37 guests hospitalized after elite Boston gala. My phone wouldn't stop ringing, angry clients, concerned vendors, reporters wanting statements. The investigation revealed the truth. The refrigeration unit in the catering truck had malfunctioned during transport. For 6 hours, that seafood had sat in temperatures high enough to breed bacteria. By the time it reached the venue, it was lethal. The supplier declared bankruptcy within a week, leaving me holding all the liability. I remembered sitting in my penthouse as the lawsuits started piling up. Lakeside Bank, 3 hospitalized guests, the venue claiming reputational damage, my insurance company fighting every claim. 22 years. I'd spent 22 years building elegance events from nothing. Started in my tiny apartment with a phone and a dream, grew it into the premier event planning company in Boston. Senators, CEOs, old money families, they all trusted me. Gone, all of it, in weeks. Richard had stood in our bedroom packing his designer suits into leather luggage. My husband of 31 years couldn't even look at me. "You should have checked the equipment yourself," he said, his voice cold. "You should have verified everything. This is your fault, Eleanor. You've ruined our lives." I'd tried to explain that I'd done everything right, that this was a freak accident that we could rebuild. But he was already gone. 2 days later, I discovered he'd emptied our joint accounts. Every penny we'd saved together vanished. His lawyer served me with divorce papers the same week my company declared bankruptcy. I found out about the other woman from a mutual friend, his 32-year-old assistant. Apparently, they'd been seeing each other for months. Then came the call from my sister Linda. I could still hear the uncomfortable pause. "Eleanor, you know I love you, but my guest room, it's yours for as long as you need it." The guest room, with the pull-out sofa and boxes of her kids' old toys stacked in the corner. That's where Eleanor Bennett ended up. My daughter Jessica tried to help. She really did. But she was 28, working in marketing, barely making ends meet herself. What could she do? It wasn't her responsibility to save her mother. So I'd learned to be small, to take up less space in Linda's home, to skip meals so I wouldn't eat too much of her groceries, to ration my insulin because I couldn't afford refills, to end up here selling parts of myself for $50. "Mrs. Bennett," Andrea's voice pulled me back to the present. I blinked, disoriented, caught between past and present. She stood in the doorway holding my sample tubes, but something about her expression had changed. Her warm brown eyes were wide, and she held those vials like they contained something precious. "I need you to wait just a bit longer," she said, her voice different now, uncertain, almost awed. "Dr. Morrison needs to verify something with your results." My stomach dropped. "Is something wrong? Am I sick?" No, it's not like that." She shook her head quickly. "Just please wait here. The doctor will explain everything." She disappeared again, still clutching those tubes. I sat there, fear creeping up my spine. What had they found? 15 minutes felt like 15 hours. I sat alone in the sterile exam room, staring at the blank white walls, my hands folded tight in my lap to keep them from shaking. The cotton ball taped to the crook of my elbow felt heavier than it should, a small weight that reminded me something had been taken, and now someone somewhere was studying it. What if they'd found something terrible? Leukemia, hepatitis, HIV. I'd read about people who discovered life-altering diagnoses at routine donation centers. People who walked in for $50 and walked out with a death sentence. My chest tightened. 20 minutes. The clock on the wall ticked forward with agonizing slowness. I counted the tiles on the floor 32. I studied the anatomy poster on the wall, veins, arteries, chambers of the heart. I tried to distract myself, but my mind kept circling back to the same terrible question. What's taking so long? Then the door opened. Andrea stepped in, and I knew immediately something was wrong. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide and glassy, like she'd just seen something she couldn't quite process. In her hands, she clutched a clipboard so tightly, her knuckles had turned white. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, her voice unsteady. Dr. Morrison wants to speak with you." Dr. Morrison. My stomach dropped. Is something wrong? Am I sick? No. She shook her head quickly, but her hands were trembling. It's not. It's just he needs to verify something. He'll be right in. She didn't wait for me to respond. She backed out of the room, leaving the door half open, and I heard her footsteps retreat down the hall at a near jog. I sat frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. A minute later, a man in his early 50s entered. He wore a white coat with a name tag that read, Dr. James Morrison, Medical Director. His graying hair was neatly combed, his expression serious, but his hands, I noticed, were shaking slightly as he held the small vial containing my sample. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, setting the vial carefully on the counter. "I'm Dr. Morrison. I oversee all testing here." "What's going on?" I asked, my voice tight. Andrea looked like she'd seen a ghost. He exhaled slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "Mrs. Bennett, your sample came back with an extraordinary result." "Extraordinary," I echoed. "What does that mean? Do I have something?" "No, you don't have a disease." He paused, his eyes locking onto mine. "You have something far rarer." I blinked, confused. I don't understand. He picked up the vial, again held it up to the light. The crimson liquid inside gleamed faintly under the fluorescent bulb. "Your type," he said quietly, "is Rh null." I stared at him. Renal. "It's often called golden liquid." He continued, his voice steady, now almost reverent. "There are only 43 known individuals in the entire world who have it. 43, Mrs. Bennett. Out of 8 billion people." I felt the air leave my lungs. That's not possible." "It's possible," he said, "and it's real. Your sample lacks all Rh antigens. That makes it universally compatible with the rarest types on Earth. If someone with an incredibly rare condition needs a transfusion and can't find a match..." He stopped, his gaze intense. "You're the match." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, "what you carry in your veins could be worth millions of dollars." I stared at Dr. Morrison, certain I'd misheard him. "I'm sorry, what?" "Millions," he repeated, his voice calm, clinical. "Mrs. Bennett, what you have is extraordinarily rare, and right now someone needs it." Before I could respond, the door opened again. A man in a charcoal suit stepped in, tailored precise, the kind of suit I used to see at corporate galas. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to boardrooms and emergency calls. His hair was dark with flecks of gray at the temples, his expression polite but urgent. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, extending a hand, "my name is Thomas Hayes. I'm a legal representative for Blackwell Pharmaceuticals." I shook his hand numbly. "Blackwell?" "Yes." He set the briefcase on the exam table, clicked it open. "I apologize for the abruptness, but time is critical. We've been searching for someone with your type for 3 weeks. You're the first viable match we've found in the Western Hemisphere." I blinked. "Match for what?" "Catherine Blackwell," he said. "She's the CEO of our company, 58 years old. She needs emergency cardiac surgery, her second. But her immune system..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Her system rejects almost everything. Standard options won't work. She needs Rh null. Without it, the surgery can't proceed." I felt the room tilt slightly. "And you want what you want me to donate?" "We're asking for your cooperation," Thomas said. "Voluntarily, of course. We're prepared to compensate you fairly." "Fairly," and I echoed. He pulled a single sheet of paper from the briefcase, slid it across the table toward me. I looked down. The number at the bottom of the page made my breath catch. $2,500,000 Amerika Serikat. $2.5 million. I laughed a sharp, bitter sound. This is a scam. It's not. Thomas's voice didn't waver. He reached into the briefcase again, this time pulling out a thick folder. This is Ms. Blackwell's medical history. These are letters of authorization from our legal department, our financial institution, and the hospital in New York, where the surgery is scheduled. Everything is legitimate. He spread the documents across the table. Letterheads from banks. I recognized a hospital I'd heard of, legal seals embossed in gold. I shook my head slowly. This doesn't make sense. 6 hours ago, I came in here to get $50. 50. And now you're telling me you came in here desperate, Thomas said quietly, and there was no judgment in his tone, only fact. I understand that. I also understand this sounds impossible. But Mrs. Bennett, what you have isn't just rare, it's irreplaceable. And right now, Ms. Blackwell's life depends on it. I looked at Dr. Morrison, who nodded. It's real, he said. I picked up the sheet with the number again, staring at the zeros. My hands were shaking. $2.5 million. Enough to pay off every debt, enough to start over, enough to stop living on Linda's couch, stop selling plasma, stop rationing insulin, enough to breathe again. There's a private jet waiting at Logan Airport, Thomas continued. We can have you in New York within 2 hours. The procedure itself would take place over several days, monitored, safe, fully compensated. You'd have access to medical staff around the clock. And if I say no, I ask, my voice barely a whisper. Thomas met my eyes. Then we keep searching. But Mrs. Bennett, there are only 43 known individuals with your type in the world. Most are overseas. Most are unavailable. You're the only option we have right now. I looked down at the paper again. $2,500,000. The number hovered in the air, impossibly large, impossibly real. My hand trembled as I handed the phone back to him. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just stood there, frozen, the weight of the offer pressing down on my chest like a stone. I need a moment, I said, my voice tight. I need to make a call, alone. Thomas nodded without hesitation. Of course. Take all the time you need. He picked up the briefcase, stepped into the hallway, and closed the door softly behind him. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the contract on the table, the zeros swimming before my eyes. Then I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I dialed Jessica. It rang twice before she picked up. Mom. Her voice was breathless, worried. Did you get the money for your insulin? Jessica, I stopped, took a breath. Something happened, something strange. What do you mean? I told her everything. The rare type, the golden designation, the 43 people in the world, the CEO in New York, the $2.5 million. There was a long silence on the other end. Mom, Jessica said slowly, that sounds like a black market scheme. It's not, I said quickly. I thought the same thing. But they have paperwork, legal documents, medical records, bank authorizations. It's legitimate. Blackwell Pharmaceuticals is a real company. I looked it up while I was waiting. Their CEO is real. This is real. Another pause. So, you're going to New York today? I don't know, I said. That's why I'm calling you. My voice cracked. I need to know if this is insane. Mom. Jessica's tone shifted softer now. How much do we owe right now between your medical expenses and the lawsuits? I closed my eyes. $170,000, maybe more. And how much do they want to give you? $2.5 million. I heard her exhale slowly. Mom, she said, if you do this, we can pay everything off. I can go back to school. You can get your own place again. We can start over. I know, but you said it's safe, right? They're not asking you to do anything dangerous. No, just donations. Monitored, medical staff, it's all supervised. Then I think you should do it. Her voice had an odd edge to it, something I couldn't quite name. Not excitement exactly. Not relief. Something sharper. Jessica, are you sure? Mom, you've been sleeping on Aunt Linda's couch for 6 months. You've been selling plasma for grocery money. If someone's offering you a way out, a legal way out, you take it. I wanted to feel reassured. I wanted to believe her certainty. But something about the quickness of her answer, the flatness in her tone, made my chest tighten. "Okay," I said quietly, "okay." "Call me when you land," Jessica said. "I love you." "I love you too." The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence. Then I opened the door. Thomas was waiting in the hallway, hands folded, expression calm. "I'll do it," I said. He nodded, relief flickering across his face. "Thank you, Mrs. Bennett. I'll arrange everything." 20 minutes later, I was sitting at a small table in the donation center's administrative office, signing page after page of documents. Thomas walked me through each one: consent forms, liability, waivers, confidentiality, agreements, payment terms. My signature looked shaky on every line. When the last page was signed, Thomas shook my hand. "A car is waiting outside," he said. "We'll take you directly to the airport. The flight is about an hour. Someone will meet you when we land." I nodded numbly. I didn't pack anything. I didn't have anything to pack. I walked out of the donation center in the same clothes I'd worn that morning: jeans, a faded sweater, sneakers with worn soles. The black car idling at the curb looked like something from another world. Thomas opened the door for me. I slid into the back seat. The leather was soft. The air smelled faintly of cedar. As the car pulled away from the curb, I turned to look out the back window. The donation center grew smaller. The street signs blurred past. The skyline of Boston familiar broken home shrank into the distance through the rearview mirror. I pressed my hand against the glass, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a terrible mistake. The Gulf Stream touched down 3 hours later at a private airfield outside New York. Through the oval window, I watched the Manhattan skyline glitter in the afternoon sun, distant, impossibly bright, like a postcard I'd never thought I'd see in person. A man in a dark suit opened the cabin door. "Mrs. Bennett, your car is waiting." I stepped onto the tarmac and stopped. A black limousine idled 20 feet away, polished to a mirror shine. The driver stood beside the rear door, hands folded. 6 hours ago, I'd been sitting in a donation center hoping to scrape together $50. Now this. The leather seats were butter soft. A bottle of sparkling water sat in the cup holder, condensation beating on the glass. As we pulled into traffic, Manhattan unfolded outside the tinted windows. Glass towers, yellow cabs, rivers of pedestrians. I pressed my fingertips against the glass, watching it all blur past. 20 minutes later, we stopped in front of a building that looked nothing like a medical facility. Lenox Hill Private Clinic was housed in a converted luxury hotel, creamstone brass fixtures. A doorman who opened my door with a polite nod. "Welcome, Mrs. Bennett." Inside the lobby was all marble and soft lighting. A receptionist greeted me by name, handed me a key card, and directed me to the elevator. My suite was on the 8th floor. I stepped inside and felt my breath catch. It wasn't a hospital room. It was a penthouse apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, the trees a patchwork of green and gold. The sitting area had cream sofas, a glass coffee table, fresh flowers. The bathroom was larger than Linda's living room, all white marble and chrome. I stood in the center of the room, trying to remember how to breathe. A knock at the door. "Mrs. Bennett, may I come in?" I opened it. A man in his mid-50s stood in the hallway, tall, lean, steel gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a white coat over a crisp shirt. "I am Dr. Klaus Weber," he said, his accent precise, faintly German. "I will be overseeing your care." "My care?" He smiled faintly. "You are not simply a donor, Mrs. Bennett. You are a guest." He gestured toward the sofa. I followed him, and he opened a leather folder on the coffee table. Charts, diagrams, lines of data. "Ms. Blackwell's condition is complex," he began. "She requires multiple transfusions before surgery, during, and after. What you carry is quite literally the line between survival and failure." I stared at the charts. "How many?" I asked. "At least 3 procedures, over 10 to 14 days. 3. 2 weeks. I nodded slowly. Dr. Weber withdrew a small vial from his coat. "We need another sample now, baseline levels, compatibility confirmation. Then we establish a nutrition protocol." I held out my arm. He worked quickly, steadily. When he finished, he pressed a cotton ball to my elbow and secured it with tape. "Rest tonight," he said, closing the folder. "Tomorrow we begin." He stood but paused at the door. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, turning back. "Miss Blackwell has requested to meet you. Tonight, if you are willing. She wishes to know the woman whose gift will save her life." I looked up, my throat tight. She wants to meet me. She insists. He inclined his head. I will return at 7 to escort you. He left. I sat alone in the suite staring out at Central Park, the city lights beginning to glow in the dusk. 6 hours ago, I'd been desperate for $50. Now I was sitting in a penthouse waiting to meet a billionaire who wanted to shake my hand. I pressed my palm against the window glass, and I still couldn't shake the feeling that something about all of this was wrong. At 7:30 that evening, Dr. Weber escorted me down a private hallway to a dining room I hadn't known existed, intimate, softly lit, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. And standing at the far end, one hand resting on a chair, was Catherine Blackwell. She was tall, taller than I'd expected, and lean in a way that spoke of illness. She wore a dove-gray silk blouse and black slacks, her silver hair swept back in a chignon. But what struck me most was the carved wooden cane in her left hand, polished smooth from use. When she looked up and met my eyes, I felt the air shift. Her gaze was sharp, assessing the kind of look that could strip a boardroom bare. Even weakened, even leaning on that cane, she commanded the room. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, her voice stronger than I'd expected. "Thank you for coming." She gestured toward the table set for two with white linens and crystal glasses. A nurse stood discreetly in the corner. "Please sit." I did. She lowered herself into the chair across from me, with careful precision setting the cane against the armrest. Then she said, "Tell me what brought you to that donation center." The bluntness startled me. No pleasantries, no small talk. I hesitated, then decided she deserved the truth. I told her everything. The banquet, the poisoning, the lawsuits, Richard draining the accounts, sleeping on Linda's couch, rationing insulin. So this morning, I said quietly, I needed $50. Tonight I'm having dinner with a billionaire. Catherine didn't interrupt once. She listened, her hands folded on the table. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You lost everything on the outside, but you carry something invaluable on the inside." I looked down at my hands. "Funny how that works," I said. A waiter appeared, setting plates before us, grilled fish, roasted vegetables. Catherine picked up her fork but ate little, moving the food more than tasting it. "I built Blackwell Pharmaceuticals from nothing," she said. 30 years, 12-hour days, boardrooms full of men who thought I had no place there. She paused. "I built an empire, and I have no one to leave it to." I glanced up. "Your daughter," her expression flickered. "My daughter and I haven't spoken in 5 years," she said. "We had a dispute over succession. She wanted the company handed to her. I wanted her to earn it." She set down her fork. "She chose pride. I chose principle." The bitterness in her voice was quiet but unmistakable. "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be. I made my choices. I built a legacy. But legacies are cold comfort when you're alone." I thought of Jessica, of the odd flatness in her voice earlier. "I have a daughter, too," I said. 28. She's been distant since the divorce. Catherine nodded slowly. "They see us at our worst, and sometimes they can't forgive us for being human." We sat in silence, the city lights glowing beyond the glass. Then Catherine leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, "what you're giving me isn't just a medical procedure. It's a second chance. A chance to fix what I broke, to reach out to my daughter before it's too late." Her voice cracked just slightly. "I don't know if she'll answer, but I need to try." I felt my throat tighten. "I hope she does," I said quietly. Catherine held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded and sat back. The waiter returned with dessert, something delicate, barely touched. And then my phone buzzed. I pulled it out. "Jessica." I looked at Catherine. "I'm sorry, may I?" "Of course." I stepped into the hallway, pressed the phone to my ear. "Mom," Jessica's voice was tight, urgent. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I'm with Ms. Blackwell now." "Mom, I've been thinking..." She paused. "You shouldn't be going through this alone. I want to come to New York. I want to be there with you." I felt something loosen in my chest. "Jessica, you don't have to..." "I want to..." she said firmly. "Please, Mom, let me be there." I closed my eyes, leaning against the wall. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." 2 days after that phone call, on my third evening at Lenox Hill, Jessica appeared at my suite door with a bouquet of white lilies and a smile so bright it made my chest ache. "Mom," she said, stepping forward and wrapping her arms around me, I missed you so much." I held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the knot in my chest loosen for the first time in days. "I'm so glad you're here," I whispered. She pulled back her hands on my shoulders, her eyes scanning my face. "How are you feeling? Are they treating you okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "Better than fine. They've been incredible." Jessica glanced around the suite, her mouth falling open slightly. "Mom, this place is—" She stopped, shook her head. "This is unbelievable." I laughed. "I know." She set the flowers on the coffee table, then turned back to me. "I'm staying with you. I already booked a hotel nearby, but I can cancel it. I want to be here. I want to take care of you. Jessica, you don't have to—" "I want to," she said firmly. That night, she cooked dinner in the suite's kitchenette pasta garlic bread, a simple salad. She massaged my shoulders while we watched an old movie on the television. We talked about everything: her marketing job, her tiny apartment in Boston, memories from before the bankruptcy, back when life had felt easier. It felt like having my daughter back. But as the evening wore on, I noticed something. Her eyes kept drifting to the coffee table where I'd left a folder: contract, documents, medical consent forms, payment schedules. Every time I looked away, I'd catch her gaze lingering there just for a second too long. When I excused myself to take a shower, I left her on the couch scrolling through her phone. 20 minutes later, I stepped out of the bathroom toweling my hair and froze. Jessica was standing by the coffee table, her phone angled down toward the open folder. She glanced up, startled, and quickly shoved the phone into her pocket. "Oh, Mom, you scared me." She laughed a little too brightly. "I was just texting a friend about this view. It's incredible, isn't it?" I looked at her, then at the folder. "Yeah," I said slowly, "it is." She smiled, kissed my cheek, and disappeared into the bathroom. I stood there for a moment, staring at the folder. Something felt off, but I pushed the thought away. The next morning, Thomas Hayes stopped by to check on me. He knocked, once stepped inside, and handed me a bottle of supplements Dr. Weber had prescribed. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Bennett?" "Good," I said. "Jessica's here now. She came to stay with me." Thomas's expression didn't change, but his eyes shifted just for a second toward the kitchenette where Jessica was making coffee. "Your daughter?" he said carefully. "Yes." He nodded, his gaze lingering on her a moment longer than necessary. Then he turned back to me, his tone polite but measured. "If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out, day or night." "Thank you, Thomas." He left. Jessica brought me a cup of coffee, set it on the table beside me, and sat down across from me with a smile. "Mom," she said, her voice soft, almost tentative, "I've been thinking." I looked up. "You're going through so much right now," she continued. "The procedure, the contracts, all the paperwork, it's overwhelming, and you shouldn't have to handle it alone." "Jessica, I'm okay. Let me help you." She leaned forward, her eyes earnest. "Let me take care of the financial side of things. The accounts, the contracts, the legal stuff. You focus on your health. I'll handle the rest." I stared at her. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Please, Mom," she said, "let me do this for you." Jessica reached into her handbag and pulled out a document, crisp, official-looking, folded neatly in thirds. "Mom," she said, setting it on the table in front of me. "This is a financial power of attorney. If you sign it, I can help manage everything while you focus on your health. The accounts, the payments, the contracts. You won't have to worry about any of it." She slid it across the table along with a pen. Her smile was warm, encouraging. I stared down at the paper. My hand reached for the pen. It made sense, didn't it? Everything was happening so fast, the procedure, the money, the legal terms I barely understood. Jessica was my daughter. I'd raised her. I'd sacrificed for her. Surely I could trust my own child. The pen felt heavy in my hand. I lowered it toward the signature line, and then someone knocked at the door. I looked up, startled. The door opened and Thomas Hayes stepped inside, his expression polite but firm. "Mrs. Bennett," he said. "I apologize for the interruption, but I wanted to check on—" His eyes landed on the document in front of me. He stopped mid-sentence. Then without asking, he walked over, picked up the paper, and scanned it quickly. His jaw tightened. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "As your legal advisor, I must strongly recommend that you do not sign any financial documents while under medical stress." He set the paper back down on the table face up and looked at Jessica. "Ms. Bennett," he said evenly, "your mother will have plenty of time to consider these matters once she's home and recovered. There's no need to rush." Jessica's smile flickered. Just for a second, but I saw it. Something cold flashed in her eyes, something sharp and angry before she pulled it back under control. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tight. "I'm her daughter. I'm trying to help her." "I understand," Thomas said, "but power of attorney is a serious legal instrument. It grants you full control over her finances. And given the circumstances, You don't think I can be trusted?" Jessica's voice rose. "You don't even know me. You don't know what we've been through." She turned to me, her eyes wide wounded. "Mom, tell him. Tell him you trust me." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Because suddenly I wasn't sure. Jessica stared at me, waiting. When I didn't answer, her expression hardened. "Fine," she said. She grabbed her handbag, stood abruptly, and headed for the door. "I came here to help you," she said, her voice shaking. "But if you don't want my help, then I won't force it." The door slammed behind her. The suite fell silent. I sat there staring at the closed door, my heart pounding. Thomas stood quietly beside the table, his hands folded. After a moment, he sat down across from me. "Mrs. Bennett," he said gently, "yesterday when I came by, I noticed your daughter photographing your contract documents." I looked up sharply. "What?" "She had her phone angled over the folder on the coffee table," he said. "I didn't say anything at the time, but when I saw this," he tapped the power of attorney. "I felt I needed to intervene." My throat felt tight. "She said she was texting a friend," I whispered. "About the view." Thomas didn't respond. He just held my gaze steady and calm. "I'm not telling you what to believe," he said quietly, "but I am telling you to be careful." He smoothed his jacket and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back. "If you need anything, Mrs. Bennett, anything at all, call me, day or night." The door closed softly behind him. I sat alone in the suite, staring at the power of attorney on the table. My daughter's handwriting was still scrawled at the top for Mom's protection. But all I could see was the look in her eyes when Thomas had stopped me from signing. Not hurt, not worry, anger. The next morning, I pushed thoughts of Jessica aside and focused on the reason I was here. My first donation was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Dr. Weber led me down a quiet hallway to a room I hadn't seen before, sleek, modern, bathed in soft light. A leather recliner sat in the center, warmed and adjusted to the perfect angle. 2 nurses moved around me with choreographed precision, checking monitors, preparing equipment. "Mrs. Bennett," Dr. Weber said, his voice calm, "your comfort and safety are our highest priorities. If you feel lightheaded or uncomfortable at any point, tell us immediately." I nodded. One of the nurses inserted the line, quick, barely a pinch, and I watched as the crimson liquid began to flow through the tube into a specialized collection bag. They handled it like liquid gold. Because to them it was. The donation took 40 minutes. When it was finished, they wrapped me in a heated blanket, brought me orange juice and dark chocolate, and monitored my vitals for another hour. Then a chef arrived with lunch-grilled salmon spinach salad, roasted beets, fresh squeezed grapefruit juice. "Iron and protein," the nurse explained, "to help you recover." 5 days later, I did it again. The second donation felt easier. My body had adjusted. The nurses smiled, reassured me, told me I was doing beautifully. Between procedures, I rested. I ate. I walked the halls of the clinic, gazing out at the city below. And I talked with Catherine. She'd been moved to a recovery suite on the same floor, her condition stable enough now that she could receive visitors. We sat together in her sitting room, her in a silk robe, me in sweatpants and a clinic-issued sweater, and we talked about everything. About empires built and lost. About daughters who turned away. About the price of ambition. "I've been thinking about what you said," Catherine told me one afternoon, her voice quiet, "about building something and then losing it." I looked up. "I spent 40 years building Blackwell Pharmaceuticals," she said. 40 years, and now I'm lying in a hospital suite wondering what it was all for. She paused. "What good is an empire if you're not alive to see it?" I thought of elegance events, the galas, the clients, the 22 years that had vanished overnight. "I built something too," I said quietly, "for 22 years, and it was gone in a week." Catherine held my gaze. "Then you understand," she said. I did. On the 15th day, I returned to the donation room for the 3rd and final time. The nurses greeted me like an old friend. Dr. Weber checked my levels one last time, nodded with satisfaction, and began the procedure. I lay back in the recliner watching the liquid flow and thought about how strange it was that something so ordinary, so invisible, could mean the difference between life and death for someone else. When it was finished, Dr. Weber removed the line-pressed gauze to my arm and handed me a glass of water. "You did beautifully, Mrs. Bennett," he said. I smiled faintly. "Is it enough?" "It's more than enough." He closed the file in his hands. "Ms. Blackwell's surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. You've given her a fighting chance." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Will she—" I stopped, swallowed. "Will she be okay?" Dr. Weber's expression softened. "I can't make promises," he said. "But thanks to you, she has the best chance she's had in years." He smoothed his coat and looked down at me with something close to admiration. "You've done a remarkable thing, Mrs. Bennett." I met Catherine in the pre-op room early that morning, watching as nurses and doctors moved around her with quiet efficiency, preparing for the 9-hour procedure ahead. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, fragile, almost childlike in the pale hospital gown. Gone was the woman who'd commanded that dining room with a carved cane and a boardroom stare. Here she was, just another patient, vulnerable and afraid. "Eleanor," she said softly. We'd moved to first names somewhere between the second and third donation. It had felt natural, inevitable. I stepped closer, took her hand. "Oh, whatever happens," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you've given me a chance. That's more than I had a month ago." I squeezed her hand. "You're going to be fine. My gift is apparently very stubborn." She laughed, then winced as pain flickered across her face. A nurse touched her shoulder gently. "Ms. Blackwell, it's time." Catherine looked at me one last time, her eyes steady. "Thank you, Eleanor." They wheeled her away at 7 o'clock. I waited in a private lounge, soft chairs, muted lighting, a coffee machine that hissed and gurgled in the corner. I tried to read. The words swam on the page. I paced. The room felt too small, then too large. I stared out the window at the skyline, watching the city wake and move and live, oblivious to the woman fighting for her life 8 floors below. Time crawled. 2 hours. 4. 6. 8. I couldn't eat. Couldn't focus. Couldn't do anything but sit and wait and feel my chest tighten with every passing minute. I thought about the day I'd walked into that donation center, the $50 I'd needed, the desperation, the shame. And now I was sitting in a private lounge in Manhattan, waiting to find out if my rare gift had saved a billionaire's life. It felt surreal. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the door opened. Dr. Weber stepped in, still wearing his surgical scrubs, a mask pulled down around his neck. His face was lined with exhaustion, but he was smiling. "Mrs. Bennett," he said. "The surgery was successful." I stood, my legs unsteady. She's okay. "Ms. Blackwell is stable," he said. "The procedure went exactly as we hoped. What you gave her worked perfectly. She's in recovery now. She'll be monitored closely for the next 48 hours, but all signs are positive." Relief hit me so hard I had to sit back down. I pressed my hands to my face, felt my shoulders shake. I'd been holding my breath for 9 hours without realizing it. "Can I see her?" I asked, my voice muffled. "Not yet," Dr. Weber said gently. "She's heavily sedated, but tomorrow, yes. I'll arrange it." He paused at the door, turned back. "What you did, Mrs. Bennett, it's extraordinary. You saved her life." He left. I sat alone in the lounge, staring at my hands. Catherine was alive. The woman who'd been a stranger 2 weeks ago, who'd looked at me across a candlelit table and told me about legacies and loneliness, she was alive. Because of me. For the first time in 6 months, I felt like I mattered. I stood, gathered my things, and headed back toward my suite, my steps lighter than they'd been in weeks. And that's when I saw Thomas Hayes standing in the hallway, his expression grave. "Mrs. Bennett," he said quietly, "we have a situation." I stopped. "What kind of situation?" He glanced down the hall, then back at me, his jaw tight. "Your daughter has filed a legal motion in Boston," he said. "She's claiming you're mentally unfit to manage your finances. She's asking the court to freeze your accounts and grant her temporary conservatorship." The floor seemed to tilt. "What?" "I received the notice an hour ago," Thomas said. "I'm sorry, Eleanor, but we need to address this immediately. If you're still here with me, comment the number 1 below so I know you're still walking this journey with me. And tell me honestly, if someone close to you suddenly became distant right after money entered the picture, would you ignore the signs? Or would you start asking hard questions? A gentle note before we continue: the next part includes dramatized elements for storytelling purposes. Some details may not fully reflect real-life events, so if this isn't for you, this is a good place to step away. Thomas led me down the hall to a small office glass walls, a polished desk, everything sterile and cold. He set a thick legal folder on the table in front of me. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first page was stamped with the seal of the Boston Superior Court. Emergency motion for temporary conservatorship. I stared at the words, my vision blurring. What does this mean? I whispered. Thomas sat down across from me, his expression grim. Your daughter and your ex-husband have filed an emergency petition, he said. They're asking the court to freeze your bank accounts and grant Jessica temporary control over your finances. I flipped to the next page. The language was dense, clinical, full of legal terms I barely understood. But certain phrases jumped out at me, stark and damning. Mentally unstable following bankruptcy. A risk of financial exploitation or self-harm. Incapable of managing significant assets without supervision. I looked up at Thomas, my throat tight. They're saying I'm what crazy. They're arguing you're vulnerable, Thomas said carefully. That the trauma of the bankruptcy, the divorce, the loss of your business, combined with the sudden influx of money, has left you in a fragile state. I turned the page, and there it was. A signed affidavit from a woman named Patricia Donnelly, who described herself as my close friend and confidant. According to her statement, I'd exhibited signs of severe depression, made irrational decisions, talked about giving all my money away to strangers. I stared at the name. I've never met this woman in my life, I said. Thomas nodded slowly. We believe she's an actress, hired to provide false testimony. The words hit me like a slap. They hired someone to lie about me. Yes. I kept reading. The petition painted a picture of me as a broken, incapacitated woman, fragile, confused, desperate. Someone who couldn't be trusted to manage her own affairs. Someone who needed to be protected. And the proposed solution: a family trust managed by Jessica Bennett and Richard Bennett to safeguard the funds until I was deemed mentally competent. Family members. My daughter and my ex-husband. The 2 people who'd abandoned me 6 months ago. Fury burned through me so hot and sharp I thought I might be sick. How can she do this? I asked, my voice breaking. How can my own daughter? I stopped, pressed my hand to my mouth. Thomas gave me a moment, then continued quietly. We've already filed a counter motion, he said. We have your medical records from Dr. Weber, documentation of your full mental capacity, affidavits from clinic staff who've worked with you over the past 2 weeks. Dr. Weber has written a detailed statement attesting to your lucidity and decision-making ability. Will it work? I asked. The motion will almost certainly be dismissed, Thomas said. The evidence against you is fabricated. The court will see that. But he hesitated. But the process takes time. And in the interim, there's a chance the court could issue a temporary freeze on your accounts just as a precaution while they investigate the claims. I closed the folder, my hands shaking. They're trying to take everything from me, I said, again. Thomas didn't argue. I sat there staring at the closed folder, trying to breathe. It wasn't Richard. I'd expected nothing from him. He'd shown me who he was the day he walked out and drained our accounts. But Jessica, my daughter, the child I'd raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally. She'd looked me in the eye 2 weeks ago and said, Mom, you shouldn't go through this alone. And now she was trying to have me declared incompetent. I thought of the power of attorney she'd tried to get me to sign, the way her eyes had lingered on the contract documents, the photographs she'd taken on her phone. It had all been a setup. From the very beginning. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I need to call her, I said. Thomas looked up. Eleanor, I don't think that's... I need to hear it from her. My voice was steady now, hard. I need to hear her say it to my face. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I scrolled to Jessica's number. Thomas stood. Eleanor. I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then she answered. Mom, I closed my eyes. "We need to talk," I said, "right now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Jessica spoke, her voice careful, tentative. "Mom, why?" I asked. My voice was strangely calm despite the fury burning through my chest. "Why did you do this?" Silence. Then, "Mom, I can explain. You tried to have me declared mentally incompetent," I said. "You hired someone to lie in court. You conspired with your father to take control of my money. Dad said you'd understand." Her voice cracked, defensive now. "He said the money should belong to the family, not just you. He said it wasn't fair that you got everything while we got nothing." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Your father took everything," I said slowly. "He drained our accounts. He moved in with another woman while I was drowning. And now he's convinced you to help him steal what I earned." "But you didn't earn it," Jessica's voice rose. "You just got lucky and now you're hoarding it." "It is mine, Jessica." My voice was hard now. "It's my body, my rare type, my choice, my contract, mine." "But you're my mother," she shouted. "I'm your daughter. Doesn't that mean anything?" I closed my eyes. "It used to mean everything," I said quietly. "Mom, until you chose money over me, until you let your father manipulate you, until you looked me in the eye and pretended to care while planning to take it all." "I do care," she cried. "But Mom, you're being selfish. $2.5 million I could pay off my loans, buy a house, start over." "There it is," I said softly. She stopped. "That's what this is really about," I said. "Not protecting me. You want the money for yourself. That's not fair. You filed a motion to have me declared incompetent," I said. "You hired an actress to lie in court. You worked with the man who destroyed me." My voice broke slightly. "And you're telling me I'm not being fair." Silence. Then Jessica's voice came back, smaller, bitter. "Fine, keep it. Keep all of it. But don't come crying to me when you're alone and miserable." I felt tears sting my eyes. "Tell your father," I said, my voice steady and cold, "that he took my business. He took my home. He took my dignity. But he will not take this." I hung up. The phone slipped from my hand. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the blank screen. Then the tears came. Not for Richard. I'd mourned him long ago. But for Jessica. For the daughter I thought I knew. The little girl I'd raised, the young woman I'd sacrificed for the child I'd believed would stand by me. She was gone. Maybe she'd never really been there at all. Thomas stood quietly by the window. When I finally looked up, he handed me a tissue without a word. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded. "You did what you had to do." I wasn't sure I believed him. 3 days later, Thomas called. "The court dismissed the motion," he said. "They found no credible evidence. Your accounts are safe." I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone pressed to my ear, and felt relief wash over me. "Thank you, Thomas." "You're welcome, Eleanor." But even as I hung up, even as I let myself breathe, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Jessica wouldn't stop. Not with Richard whispering in her ear. Not with $2.5 million on the line. And I wasn't sure I had the strength to fight her again. 2 weeks after the surgery, Catherine was well enough to meet me in her private office at the clinic. The change in her was remarkable. The pallor was gone, replaced by color in her cheeks. Her eyes were sharp again, alive with the energy I'd seen in our first dinner together. She still moved carefully, but the fragility had lifted. "Eleanor," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Sit, please." I sat. She studied me for a moment, then slid a leather folder across the desk. "I've been thinking about our conversations," she said. "About empires built and lost, about starting over, about what it means to rebuild." I opened the folder. Inside was a business proposal printed on crisp white paper, bound with a silver clip. "Phoenix Advisory, Crisis Management Consulting." I looked up. "I want you to build a company," Catherine said. "A consulting firm. You'll help businesses navigate catastrophic failure bankruptcies, public scandals, leadership collapses, the kind of crises you survived yourself." I stared at the document. "Your expertise," she continued, "is not event planning. It's survival. It's resilience. It's knowing how to stand back up when everything's been taken from you." She leaned forward. "Blackwell Pharmaceuticals will provide seed capital and client introductions. You'll have office space, administrative support, a full operational budget. We'll open doors. You'll walk through them." I flipped through the pages. Financial projections, partnership terms, equity splits. I don't want charity, I said immediately. Catherine smiled. This isn't charity. She tapped the folder. You remade me with what you gave. Let me help you rebuild yourself with resources. Not a gift, Eleanor, an investment. I looked down at the equity structure. 60% Eleanor Bennett, 40% Blackwell Pharmaceuticals. You'll retain full operational control, Catherine said. We're simply partners. Silent partners, if you prefer, but partners. I read through the terms carefully, my old event planning instincts kicking in, analyzing clauses, checking for traps, looking for the catch. There wasn't one. It was fair, generous, structured like a real partnership, not a handout. What? I asked quietly. Catherine sat back, her expression softening. Because you saved my life, she said. And because I see myself in you. I know what it's like to lose everything and have to fight your way back. I did it once 40 years ago with nothing but ambition and stubbornness. She paused. You have both. And you have something I didn't, perspective. You've been on the other side. You know what it feels like to fall. I felt something tighten in my chest. If I do this, I said slowly, I do it my way. No interference, no board oversight, no second guessing. Agreed. And if it fails, then it fails, Catherine said. But I don't think it will. I looked down at the proposal again. Phoenix Advisory. Rising from the ashes. I thought about elegance events. 22 years gone in a week. I thought about the plasma donation center. $50. The shame. I thought about Jessica's voice on the phone. You're being selfish. And I thought about Thomas's words. You did what you had to do. I looked up at Catherine. I'll do it, I said. But I need to go back to Boston first. I have unfinished business. Catherine nodded. Of course. 2 days later, I boarded a flight home. Not coach this time. Business class. A window seat, a glass of wine, a leather folder in my lap with the signed partnership agreement inside. I stared out at the clouds, watching the city shrink below me. I'd walked into that donation center, desperate, broken, with $40 in my account and no idea how I'd survive the next week. Now I was flying home with $2.5 million of business partnership and a plan. Not to rebuild what I'd lost, but to build something new, something that was truly mine. I'd been back in Boston for 5 days, settling into a modest apartment on Beacon Street, when Jessica appeared at my door. She looked terrible, eyes red and swollen hair, unwashed and tangled hands, twisting together with anxious energy. Her clothes were wrinkled, her face blotchy from crying. Mom, she said, her voice small and broken. Please, I'm so sorry. Can we talk? Against every instinct screaming at me to say no, I stepped aside and let her in. Jessica collapsed onto my couch, sobbing into her hands. Her shoulders shook. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Dad manipulated me, she said between sobs. He told me you'd changed, that the money made you cruel and selfish. He said we deserved half of it because we're family. He made it sound like you were stealing from us. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I was wrong, Mom. I was so wrong. Please forgive me. I'll do anything. I stood across the room, arms folded, watching her cry, and I felt my resolve waver. She was my daughter, my only child. The little girl I'd raised, the young woman I'd helped through college, the person I'd loved more than anyone in the world. Maybe Richard had manipulated her. Maybe she really was sorry. Maybe people could change. Maybe I could forgive her. Maybe. My phone rang. Linda. Hold on, I said to Jessica, stepping into the bedroom and closing the door behind me. Eleanor. Linda's voice was urgent, breathless. Don't believe her. Whatever she's telling you, don't believe a word of it. What are you talking about? I just overheard her on the phone with Richard. I was in my garden when she walked past on the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear. I heard everything. My stomach dropped. What did you hear? They're planning another lawsuit. They're going to accuse you of financial fraud, claim you hid assets before the bankruptcy to protect yourself. Eleanor, she's not there to apologize. She's there to set you up. I stood there gripping the phone, staring at the closed bedroom door. Are you sure? I heard her laugh, Eleanor. She was laughing about how you'd probably fall for it. I closed my eyes. Then I walked back into the living room. Jessica looked up, eyes wide and wet with tears. Was that Aunt Linda? I didn't answer. "Tell me the truth, Jessica," I said quietly. "Right now, what are you and your father planning?" "Nothing, Mom, I swear. The truth," I said, my voice cold as steel. Jessica's face crumpled, and then it hardened into something ugly. The tears stopped. The trembling stopped. Her expression shifted into something I'd never seen before, raw, bitter resentment. "Fine," she spat. "You want the truth. You've always had everything. The career, the reputation, the admiration, and now millions of dollars on top of it all." She stood, her voice rising with every word. "What about me? I'm your daughter. I deserve half of everything you have. You wouldn't even have that money if you hadn't gotten lucky with some random condition in your veins." I felt something inside me snap, not with anger, but with clarity. "You used to deserve a mother who loved you," I said quietly. "You threw that away for money that was never yours." I walked to the door and opened it. "Get out of my apartment," I said. "Get out of my life." Jessica grabbed her bag, fury twisting her features into something unrecognizable. "You'll regret this," she shouted. "You'll die alone, you selfish, bitter old woman." She stormed past me and slammed the door so hard the windows rattled in their frames. I stood there in the sudden silence, staring at the closed door, and realized I wasn't crying. For the first time in months, I felt clear. The door was closed. The boundary was set. Jessica was gone, and I was free. 6 months later, I stood in the office of Phoenix Advisory, looking out over Boston Harbor as spring sunlight warmed the glass. My company occupied a modest suite in the financial district, nothing extravagant but mine. 3 employees sat at desks behind me, good people with sharp skills and steady loyalty. 12 clients on our roster, businesses facing their own catastrophic moments. I'd helped a restaurant chain survive a food contamination scandal, guided a tech startup through a data breach crisis, supported a family business in recovering from embezzlement. The work mattered in a way event planning never had. This wasn't about floral arrangements or seating charts. This was about lives, about legacies, about people who'd lost everything and needed someone who understood what that felt like. Richard's lawyers had tried one more lawsuit accusing me of hiding assets before the bankruptcy. Thomas's team had crushed it within a week, exposing Richard's own financial misconduct in the process. He disappeared entirely after that. No calls, no letters, no attempts to reach me through Jessica. Good riddance. Linda visited often now. We'd rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully. She'd apologized for not protecting me better during the worst of it. "You told me the truth when it mattered most," I'd said. "That's enough." My phone rang. "Eleanor." Catherine's voice came through clear and strong. "I'm calling from Zurich. We're expanding the European operations, and I wanted your input on the Henderson account." We talked business for 15 minutes, client strategies, risk assessments, crisis timelines. The partnership worked. Catherine provided resources and connections. I provided expertise and execution. Neither of us interfered with the other. When we finished, Catherine paused. "Any word from Jessica?" I walked to my desk, opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a handwritten letter postmarked 3 weeks ago, 5 pages front and back in Jessica's familiar looping script. She'd cut off contact with Richard completely, was in therapy working through her own issues, had taken a nonprofit job that paid far less than her old marketing position, searching for meaning beyond money. The letter didn't beg for forgiveness. It simply acknowledged the harm she'd caused, the choices she'd made, the person she was trying to become. "I received a letter," I said quietly. "Are you going to answer it?" I looked down at the pages, the ink slightly smudged in places, as though she'd cried while writing. "Not yet," I said, "but I'm keeping it." "That's progress," Catherine said gently. "She's still my daughter," I said. "But she needs to learn that love doesn't mean unconditional forgiveness. It means holding people accountable while still hoping they become better." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "You're wiser than I was at your age," she said. "I hope my daughter figures that out before it's too late." "I hope so too." After we hung up, I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the drawer. Not thrown away, but not answered. Not yet. Maybe someday. Maybe not. I turned back to the window, watching the harbor shimmer in the light. The city where I'd lost everything was the same city where I was building it all back, not the same empire, but something better, something mine. My phone buzzed, a new client inquiry. I smiled and answered, "Phoenix Advisory, Eleanor Bennett speaking." The voice on the other end was frantic, desperate, a small business owner whose company had just been hit with a public scandal. They needed help. They needed someone who understood. I pulled out a notepad and began taking notes. "Tell me what happened," I said. "Start from the beginning." For the first time in my life, I wasn't rebuilding for anyone else. Not for Richard, not for Jessica, not even for Catherine, though I was grateful for her partnership. I was rebuilding for myself, and that was enough. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized my biggest mistake wasn't trusting the wrong people. It was forgetting to trust myself. For years, I built my identity around being a good wife, a good mother, a successful businesswoman. When those roles collapsed, I thought I'd lost everything. But the truth is, I'd never truly built anything for me. If you're going through something similar, don't be like I was. Don't wait until you're desperate and broken to discover your own worth. Don't sacrifice your boundaries for people who see your love as a transaction. And most importantly, don't let anyone, not your spouse, not your children, convince you that putting yourself first is selfish. Family drama stories taught me that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Grandma's stories from my own childhood showed me that resilience runs deeper than I knew. These family drama stories aren't just about betrayal, they're about reclaiming power. The grandma stories I heard growing up always ended with strength, not bitterness. I'm trying to live that way now. What I've learned from family drama stories like mine is that sometimes the hardest battles are fought within our own homes. The grandma stories that shaped me taught survival, not surrender. God gave me a rare gift in my veins, yes, but the real gift was the clarity that came after I lost everything. It wasn't the money that saved me. It was finally understanding that I am enough alone without needing anyone's approval. So here's my lesson. Build something that's truly yours. Set boundaries even with the people you love most. And remember, forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone hurt you again. Thank you for walking this journey with me to the very end. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you'd found yourself in my shoes, facing betrayal from your own daughter? Please leave a comment and share your perspective. If this story resonated with you, I hope you'll consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. A gentle note. While I've drawn inspiration from real-life themes and lessons passed down through generations, certain elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. If this content isn't your preference, feel free to explore other videos that might suit you better.